One second. Yes, Prabhuji, it's done.
Thank you, Manji. Thank you so much. So yes, each time I am preparing a verse and I look at the verse and I think, okay, I read the verse, I read the purport, I look at which points Prabhupada is making, and then I think of it like maybe just a title of this theme. What are we trying to cover in this? And today the theme was for me was developing the eyes to see God. Because if you ask me if I'm seeing God with my own eyes, I would definitely say no. So in this way, I wanted to talk about why, first of all, why can't we see God? What are the blocks for us to seeing God? And then how to see God. And that can actually be done in, I'm going to talk about three specific ways, which is through hearing, through purifying ourselves, and through trying to see God's hand in our lives. So, first of all, why can't we see God? In the Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, it's given a clue here. So Arjun says to Krishna, Garbhanya dosa bhata svabhava pachamitam dharma sumuda chetaha yastreya shan nishitam bruhitan me shishyaste ham shadi mam tam prapanam. So Arjun here, he's saying, I have lost all composure due to miserly weakness, and I'm confused about what is my duty. So this is our position in one sense. So what to speak of Arjun, who had God, had Krishna right in front of him, yet he was in this position, even though he was a pure devotee of the Lord, an intimate associate of Krishna, he was still completely bewildered and confused. And this is often our position, and a clue as to why we are unable to see God in many instances is because of our own bewilderment. And as we've discussed earlier, that to be human means to have four defects, one of which is imperfect senses, which means that we're unable to perceive God through our limited senses. I'd like to share you a short story from a Christian fable, which also illustrates sometimes God may be acting right in front of us and we may not be able to see him. So this is an old Christian fable. So once there was a man who had gone out swimming in the sea. And although he was an adept swimmer, he'd gone at quite a late time, and he began to become caught in a current, in an undercurrent, and as such, he started to drown. So he was a very deeply religious man, had strong faith in God, and so he began praying to God to save him as he was drowning. At that very moment, a lifeguard came on a raft and said, Sir, please let me help you. I'll come to save you." And the man said, No, God will save me. At which point the lifeguard went on his way, and out came even a boat, a huge boat came, and they threw out a raft to save the a floatable device, and said, Sir, please grab on. We're here to save you. He said, No, don't worry. God will save me. And then finally, a helicopter even came. So a helicopter came, dropped down the ladder, and said, Sir, please grab on. And this, the devout man said, No, God will save me. At which point, unfortunately, the man drowned. But he was such a pious man, he was taken up and put in front of God. At which point, he asked the Lord, he said, God, why didn't you save me? At which point, the Lord replied, wasn't the raft, the boat, and the helicopter enough? I sent all those three. So the point is of this fable is that often we may be facing difficulties in our lives. Often we think that we need some kind of revelation to see God's hand in our lives, but actually, He's acting right in front of us. For a moment, I'd like to you all just to sit for a minute and think of a difficult time that you've faced in your lives. I'm sure we all face difficulties in our lives. And then this could be at any point in the past. It could be something you're going through now, but probably better than something you faced in the past. Then think try and think about how difficult it was at that, than the feelings you're experiencing and the frustration you're experiencing at that moment. Then, as we look past that difficult event, we can see that perhaps it may have happened for our benefit. And as we look back, we can see, I'm so glad that that happened in that way because I was saved. Well, at the time, it just can seem so difficult, right? I'd like to give another kind of a story. Prabhupada mentions in the purport here, he says that in the material world, we also do not always see things with our own eyes. We sometimes see through the experience of those who have actually seen or done things. So in this way, Prabhupada is actually seeing that we often don't see things, even in a material sense, for what they are and the reality of the situation. And instead, we see things through our own conditioning. And ultimately, we're almost blinded to see the real situation. On one occasion, there was a man, and it was his anniversary. So he'd booked a restaurant for his wife's favorite place, and it was very, very difficult to obtain this reservation, but somehow he managed to get it. And it'd taken weeks and weeks to get this. They'd planned it for a long time, and the reservation was booked for 7 o'clock sharp. Now, as the restaurant was very, very busy, it was very difficult to get a reservation at such a place. And as such, if you didn't keep your reservation, the table would go quickly. So the man arrived, went straight from work, straight from the office, waiting for his wife on their anniversary. And he'd got there well before the reservation. He began waiting, and still his wife didn't arrive. The time passed for the reservation, and still his wife hadn't arrived. At this point, the man became very frustrated. He called his wife, she didn't answer. He waited another 10 minutes. The reservation was now lost. He called again, and she didn't answer. Then finally, she arrived 45 minutes late, at which point the man was extremely angry. He said, "Do you know how hard it was for me to get this reservation? Can you not understand? Why did you do this?" And began insulting her. At which point, his wife, with a solemn look on her face, said, "I'm very, very sorry that I'm so late for this, and we've missed our reservation. There was actually a serious road traffic accident in which someone had been killed and others were severely injured. So I was helping and calling the emergency services, and hence why I couldn't answer the phone." At this point, the man lowered his head and apologized profusely. So this is an example again where even just from a material perspective, we can't actually see the full picture of what is happening within our own lives from a material perspective, what to think of a transcendental perspective, and how to see the supreme reality, which is the Lord. In my own life, I'd also like to just share something before we go on to the presentation in terms of developing the eyes to see God. So something quite personal for me is growing up, my parents were very strict on me, very, very strict, very with a strong emphasis on academia. And yeah, someone could say even by today's standards, over disciplinarian. So growing up, especially in my kind of 20s, I actually had lots of resentment towards my parents for being so strict with me. But as I I've got older, I started learning more about my parents' background. And interesting enough, like as I would imagine many Indians who've grown up in the West, my father was actually born in Kenya also. He was born in a place called Kisumu, which some of you may have heard of. My mother was also born in Africa, in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. And hearing about all the troubles that they had to face growing up, and then the difficulties that they faced whilst settling in the UK, and the difficulties they faced while trying to raise me, made me just understand so much more and gain more empathy towards them. And through learning more about them, I was able to let go of some of the resentment I held towards them and could understand the difficult circumstances they were facing. And so this is an example of how we can understand from a material perspective different circumstances. And I thought that example leads us nicely into so we've talked about why we can't see God because we're often blinded by our own lack of information, our own conditioning, as we've said, and that's even from a material perspective. So how can we? So now I want to talk a little bit about how to actually see God. So I'm just going to see if I can get. I've prepared a short presentation, and I hope. I'm just. Please excuse me. I'm on a different computer today, so I'm just trying to get used to find my bearings. Let's have a look. Oh, there we go. All right. So I hope you can see this screen. Is everyone able to see that? Is anyone able to give me? Yep, you can, Mataji. Thank you. So prepared a short presentation called "Developing the Eyes to See God," and as I mentioned, there's three things I'd like to talk about, which is first of all, hearing. Through hearing, we can actually see God and perceive Him. And the second way is to purify ourselves, and finally see God's hand in our lives. So the first point is to hear, hearing effectively. I want to talk about the process of self-realization. Part of the process of self-realization is hearing, and there's four specific words which are very, very important in this. And this is actually spoken about in the Upanishads as the process of hearing. The first is Shravanam, a word you've probably heard quite a lot whilst discussing Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Shravanam means to hear. So hearing about Krishna and his devotees, reading and listening with attention. So reading actually also can form part of Shravanam. But we often don't hear about the rest of the three parts. So the next part is Mananam. Man means mind, and so Mananam means to think or to reflect and contemplate. And I've heard a nice analogy where Shravanam could potentially be you have some food. In this case, the food is the nectar of the Shastra and the scriptures, and Shravan is the process of putting it in one's mouth. So we're just hearing, we just put it in our mouth. Mananam, think about it, reflect and contemplate. So this could be chewing. So we're chewing, we're thinking and contemplating. What does this mean? How do I understand this? How does this relate to me? Can I understand? The next point is nidasasam. So this is the digestion of the food. We're taking it down, and what it literally means is to realize and apply what you've learnt in your own life. So how does this really affect me? How can I implement this on a day-to-day basis within my own life? But as Vaishnavas, aspiring Vaishnavas, there's a very, very important step which intertwines along each of these three stages of Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam, which is Vandanam. Vandanam means prayer. So at each stage, we pray, as we know from Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna explains that from me comes remembrance and forgetfulness. And from Krishna, Krishna is actually the intelligence in man. So by praying at each stage, Krishna, please help me to understand. Before we actually read the Srimad Bhagavatam, we recite many prayers, the Mangalacharan, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And we do this so we're in a position to receive the mercy of the Lord and understand really what's happening. So these are 4 very, very important steps which form the process of hearing. It's very much not a passive process, but an active process, a proactive process by which we can really become closer to the Lord and ultimately see Him. An important part of this is focus on the self. So something I wanted to share with you, which I thought was a nice example, was once there was a devotee who was coming to the temple, and she could see, though, in the temple that many people many aspiring devotees were not behaving properly. Some people in the class, they'd be talking while the class was going on. Some people, they'd be outside the temple gossiping about other devotees. And some people, they would not be performing the rituals and worship properly within the temple. So she approached a senior devotee, or Maharaj, in the temple and said, Maharaj, I've seen so many things, so many people doing different things wrong in the temple. I think I'm going to stop coming. So the Maharaj, he said to her, okay, you can stop coming to the temple. But first, if you could just do one thing for me. So the lady, she said, yes, Maharaj, yes, of course. He said, right, take this glass of water, which is full, and walk around the temple, the whole temple, the outside of the temple once, and bring it back to me. So the lady took the glass of water, feeling very confused, and started walking around the temple very, very carefully to ensure she followed the Maharaj's instructions not to spill a single drop. She walked around the temple carefully and was able to carry the glass of water without dropping anything, and then hand it back to the Maharaj. The Maharaj then explained to her, he said, so while you were carrying this glass of water, did you notice anyone gossiping? She said, no. Did you notice anyone behaving inappropriately? She said, no. He said, did you notice anyone not worshipping correctly? She said, no. And he said, why is that? She said, well, I was so focused on not spilling any water out of the glass that I couldn't see what anyone else was doing. In this same way, Maharaj explained, be that focused on Krishna that you don't recognize the faults of others. So it's such an important point that it's easy to see the faults of others, but it's much harder to see our own faults. And there's a saying that when you point the finger at someone, there's actually 3 fingers pointing back at you. So it's so important that this is a process of self-realization, not others' realization, and that we keep the focus on ourselves. And although we may acknowledge faults in others, they're often a reflection of something that we see in ourselves. There's a saying in psychology, I'm a trainee psychotherapist. They say, you spot it, you got it, which means if you see a fault in someone else, most likely you have that fault also, which is why you're able to see it. So it's so important to focus on ourselves. The next point I wanted to mention was the point of purification. So purifying ourselves. Now, it's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita in the 10th chapter, Desham satata yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam tadami buddhiyogam tam vyenamam obhiyantate. So, to those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. But there's a key word in this verse, satata yuktanam, always engaged. So we can see that it can be very difficult to be always engaged in Krishna consciousness. We can say that, yes, in the morning I'm engaged, while I'm in the Sangha, I'm engaged, while I'm reading, I'm engaged, but to always be engaged, extremely, extremely difficult. And this is why Krishna consciousness is often referred to not as just a morning practice or a nighttime practice, but it's referred to as a moment to moment practice. So how can we think, what are the other things we can be doing on a day-to-day basis? And actually, later in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in this very canto, in the ninth chapter, there's an amazing purport by Srila Prabhupada, which talks about some of the unwanted qualities we have and how to overcome them. So I've just created a short presentation this on how to purify ourselves, which I thought was wonderful. This is directly from the purport of Srila Prabhupada. So, first of all, anger. Now, I'm sure like we've all experienced anger at some points in our lives. And Srila Prabhupada says in this purport in the ninth chapter of this very first canto, to get freedom from anger, one should learn how to forgive. So it's so important that this is a practice, something that we could do on a day-to-day basis, learning how to forgive. And I mentioned earlier the situation with my parents is that this can often be done by understanding another person's point of view, understanding, gaining more information, and by this way we can learn how to forgive others. Not necessarily doesn't mean we forget what they've done to us and perhaps learn a lesson from that. But ultimately, if we can still learn to let go of that from our heart, become free from anger, this is one of the blocks to actually becoming self-realized. So here, the next point is unlawful desires. To be free from lawful desires, one should not make plans. So the context of this and the key word is unlawful. So the many things which we may desire for, which we know we are never going to achieve, which is not going to help us on a path of Krishna consciousness. Some of us may have a desire to be like very, very famous. Some of us may have a desire to be billionaires. And in such a way, we can sometimes be making too many plans, too many grandiose plans, but instead, can we make plans within the context of Krishna consciousness? And in this way, our desires will reduce less and less, as we can become more accepting of what is within our capabilities, what is within our destiny, and ultimately that by getting rid of these unlawful desires, we can reduce the agitation for the mind, which is actually a blockade to progressing within Krishna consciousness. Sleep. So by spiritual culture, one is able to conquer sleep. Now, you could say on the one hand, we all need to sleep. Srila Prabhupada even says himself that if one sleeps too much, he becomes lazy. But if you don't sleep enough, you become crazy. But what Srila Prabhupada means by this is sleeping in a regulated way. So, and this is by engaging in spiritual culture, and part of the spiritual culture, a very, very common phrase: early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. So this is part of the spiritual culture. Can we adopt our lifestyle to not be staying up late like so many people? Can we rise early in the mornings, practice our sadhana, and eat in a regulated fashion, eat it early enough so that we can go to sleep early and rise early again the next day? Avarice. By tolerance only can one conquer desires and avarice. So avarice means greed for excessive material wealth. As I mentioned before, that we can have many desires before Krishna consciousness, even within Krishna consciousness. And by practicing tolerance, one can overcome this need for this avarice, which is a want for excessive wealth. Again, this is a practice that we can do on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes at work, we maybe experience difficult circumstances. We want to react. Sometimes within our families, we may want to we may feel we're being mistreated, but can we tolerate to some degree? And even if we need to take some action, can we do so in a forgiving mood and a compassionate mood, and not give in to our lower nature by acting in the wrong way? So diseases. Now, the ultimate cure for disease, obviously, is to escape the cycle of birth and death. But if we don't look after our bodies to the best of our ability, if I was to eat, pizza and chips and sugary drinks every day and not look after my body properly, I still could be following the four regulative principles. But by not following a regulated diet, I can make my life, even to practice Krishna consciousness, very difficult. So Srila Prabhupada says in his purport, disturbances from various diseases can be avoided by regulated diets. So it's spoken in the Bhagavad Gita about foods in the mode of goodness, and it's important that wherever possible we can do this. And it's actually Bhaktivinoda Thakur who says health, sadhana, service. So health comes first. It's very important that as aspiring devotees, we look after our health, try and have a regulated diet, and this will help in our practice of Krishna consciousness. False hopes. So he says here, Srila Prabhupada, by self-control, one can be free from false hopes, and money can be saved by avoiding undesirable association. So self-control essentially means that not endeavoring too much and not engaging too much for things which are not meant for us or what are not helpful for us. I know I've often battled within my own mind the desire to want to progress unlimitedly towards my career, earn more Lakshmi, and achieve a higher position, achieve a higher status, and things like that. But by practicing self-control and understanding, okay, if I can just live a more simple life, then I won't need to earn so much Lakshmi. If I can make do with the house that I currently have, if I can maybe control my need for other forms of entertainment, for a nicer car, etc., things like this, and make do with what I have, then um, I can ultimately be free from these false hopes and practicing this level of self-control. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm definitely not a master of this, but it's something that I try on a day-to-day basis. Um, an important point here is money can be saved by avoiding undesirable um, association. This is a very, very important point because we are the sum of the people we associate with. And ultimately, I know even within my community, one is considered a success if he has a high position in society and is materially opulent. So I come from sort of a Gujarati background, and many people in our community think like this. And I'd even been chastised in the past for kind of not, by certain family members for not even trying to earn more money and start a business and things like this. And so what I can say is this is such an important point that we can easily be influenced if we're associating with people who think in this way. Ultimately, we're trying to achieve something higher. We're trying to achieve self-realization. And so by this kind of worldly association, this materialistic way of thinking, we can protect ourselves by being influenced in this way. And worldliness can be avoided by culturing the knowledge of impermanence. So it's so important to regularly hear the scriptures, and so we can be reminded of the impermanence of this material world. The final 2 points in this purport was hunger. So by practice of yoga, one can control hunger. Yes, it's very important not to eat excessively, and this can affect us in so many different ways. For example, if one was to eat excessively at night, it becomes more difficult to sleep, which has a knock-on effect, becomes more difficult to rise. My guru actually said once, he said, try Okay, so eat a lot of heavy foods such as pizza late at night, and then see how your rounds are the next morning. So it's very important that one practices um, this. And finally, talkativeness can be avoided by gravity and silence. So sometimes I know I can definitely speak for myself. We can have a excessive need to talk when it is the time. There can be times where gravity and silence is needed, and sometimes we practice this even amongst the association of others, where we may feel an urge to talk, but can we practice just being grave, being silent, and just hearing what others have to say, and controlling our urge to want to speak? And by this way, we can actually control this actually known as demand of the tongue, which is not only to taste but also to speak excessively. And finally, Srila Prabhupada said this before: one must be free from lust, avarice, anger, dreaming, etc., to actually attain the path of salvation. So these are some things that we can practice on a day-to-day basis, very, very practical things by which we can actually advance ourselves, purify ourselves on a day basis, and advance on the path of Krishna consciousness. The final point was try to see Krishna's hand in our lives. I know we don't have very much time left. There's a wonderful pastime later on in the Bhagavatam by a personality known as the Avadut, also known as the Avanti Brahmana. And this is in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. A short summary of this pastime is the Avadut actually explains 24 gurus, but these 24 gurus are things that he actually just sees out on his travels. An example, three of these is one is the earth. So the Avadut at the Avanti Brahmin, he actually learns from just observing the earth. Here he says, from the earth I learned that when one is overcome by the elements of material nature through one's destiny, one should not swerve from the spiritual path. From the earth's trees and mountains, I have also learned to be selfless, and so I'm ready to act for the benefit of others like the trees. Obviously, a very, very famous verse by uh, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Janada pisu nichena, dorora pisu ishtanam, amanina manadina, kirtanya sadahari. One must be as humble as a blade of grass, as tolerant as a tree, offering respect to all others and expect none in return. So this is the quality of a blade of grass of the tree, and here we can see from the Avanti Brahmin, the earth. Of the air, he says, a yogi, he said, interacts with the sense objects just like the air does. Similarly, just as the air does not become attached, neither does the yogi. Sometimes the air takes on the odors of the earthly objects it passes over or through. However, it simply carries these odors. So this is a very deep meaning and something that can be hard to comprehend. But essentially, what the Avanti Brahmin is saying here with regards to air is that we're constantly coming into contact with objects of the senses, and sometimes we can ruminate on them and think that carry them with us even within our mind. But instead, we can just, if we can practice the art of detachment and reminding ourselves that through these sense objects, I'm not going to achieve real happiness or even satisfaction. And finally, there's so many. As I said, this could be a series of um, sanghas just on this very one pastime. It's such an amazing pastime and so many lessons to be learned. But here, I thought was a nice example of fire, where the Brahmin observes fire and said, sometimes a fire is covered by ashes, but it is still present. If we sprinkle oil or butter on the ash, it suddenly bursts into flames again. In like manner, the truly saintly prefer not to advertise themselves. However, when a seeker approaches them with faith and inquiry, the saint's qualities manifest like a flame, and he spreads the light of his knowledge to others. So it's often said that one should not make a show of being a devotee. So one should not try and advertise how great they are or even excessively preach to those who are not interested. So in one sense, a devotee, one quality of a Vaishnava is actually meek. So one is meek and humble. I definitely have got a long to go to develop these qualities. But here is given a wonderful example that when someone approaches that person, said person, the fire of devotion comes out from them and bursts forth to help this inquirer along their path of devotional service. So these are very esoteric, and we may not be able to see things like this in our life to such a deep level as this Brahmana. But can we see in our lives what perhaps how the Lord has given us some special mercy? Can you look back on your life, perhaps, as we discussed earlier, and see some difficulties you were facing, and see how you received the mercy of the Lord? Can you see perhaps how I can see for myself that I was in a very distressed way, and I approached the temple, and somehow, by the mercy of the Lord, I ended up living with the devotee. From that time onwards, there were so many coincidences which were too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence, which actually ended up meant that I'm still on the path of Krishna consciousness today. And I think without actually facing such difficulties in my life, I may not even be practicing Krishna consciousness. So yes, we talked about why can't we see God, and perhaps we can be in periods of distress, just like Arjun was, and we all face difficulties. But even in material circumstances, there can be so many misunderstandings. What to speak of understanding the Lord? So then we talked about how can we actually see God, and this is actually through hearing. But there's a process to hearing. It's not just listening. It's Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasasam, and constantly praying, Vandanam. We need to purify ourselves. As we said, Krishna consciousness is a moment-to-moment practice with several practices we can be doing on a day-to-day basis, as Srila Prabhupada explained nicely in his purport. And finally, we talked about seeing God, God's hand, Krishna's hand in our lives. And on a very, very high level, we briefly touched upon the pastime of the Avanti Brahmin and how he was able to see and learn so many things from just his travels, from the earth, from the air, from the fire. And there are many, many more examples given in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say, yes, so this is one of the authorized ways of developing the eyes to see God. And now welcome any comments, corrections, or questions. And thank you so much for your kind attention. Hare Krishna.
Ribal, are there any comments in this session for Prabhu?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you very much for your time and great explanation. Is it possible you could kindly share your slides with us, please?
Yes, Prabhu. Yes, not a problem. I'll send them to Soni Mataji and she can distribute within the group. I'd be more than happy to. Yes.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Are there any more questions?
Hare Krishna, yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes.
From my understanding, I think this material world is full of miseries, correct?
Yes, Prabhu.
And we'll never be happy till death anyway. I think so. The only way out is through Krishna consciousness. So you're not coming back here again, is it?
Yes, that's right, Prabhu. Yes.
So even if you're in the path, till we die, we're still going to face difficulties and unhappiness.
Yes, Prabhu.
So the other point is, then people would ask me, then why do we even need to, if that's going to happen, you might as well just enjoy life, whether
Yeah,
you're on the path or not.
very good question, Prabhu. So yes, I was actually asked this question by my father recently as well. He said, well, you know, whether you're on the path or not, everyone, even whether you're experiencing if you're practicing Krishna consciousness or if you're not, we all have to suffer. Just because you stop chanting Hare Krishna and put on some beads, start wearing some beads and putting on some tilak and stopping certain things, doesn't mean that you're doesn't mean that you're going to stop suffering. We're all in a material body, so why bother? Might as well just enjoy. So to that, I would say that we are a product of what we cultivate. So, and Krishna speaks about in the Bhagavad Gita that, and we've talked about this in previous sanghas, that what determines one's birth in the next life is one's thought at the moment of death and one's karma. One's like, but how does one cultivate what one thinks about is what one practices on a day-to-day basis. And as example, if I was to watch, I used to watch a lot of action movies before I came to Krishna consciousness, and I was also a boxer, and I used to watch lots of boxing, and so then I'd be thinking a lot about like action, fighting, boxing, things like this, and sometimes I would even have dreams about such things. So at the moment of if I continued to do that and enjoy myself in such a way, then what do you think I would be thinking about at the moment of death? I would probably be thinking about something like that. So in the same way, rather than enjoying, one could say, oh, we're going to suffer anyway. But actually, what we're doing is we're preparing for the moment of death. This is our final test. And whatever we do in this life, if we talk about Krishna, if we talk about God, if we chant his names, we're more likely to think about God at the moment of death. Whereas if we just forget about all of that and just enjoy yourself, then unfortunately that's what will determine our birth in the next life, because ultimately that's probably what's been going on in our consciousness throughout our life, and that's most likely going to be related to our final thoughts at death. Does that make sense, Prabhu?
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And sorry, I joined in late, so I don't know if you covered this, but I just wanted to ask you, so what made you go into Krishna consciousness, and for how long have you been in it?
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Yes, in summary, I have been practicing seriously, I would say 7 years. And what made me go into Krishna consciousness was I was in to give a brief and make a long story short, I was doing quite, I was in a successful job, successful career, making quite, like good money, etc. But I was also about to get, someone was, I was associating with someone and about to get married, and but something just didn't feel, I was questioning, is this all there is? I'd been taught in life that one should just earn lots of money, get married, and this is, and that's it for life. And then when you're gone, you're gone. But I started asking questions. I could see the culture, the toxic culture in the company I was working in. And I just felt that there was more to life. And I started asking questions about the world, about why everyone is suffering in the world, and why people treat the environment so badly, why people treat animals so badly, why people treat each other so badly. And I started reading various spiritual literatures, and through this, and ultimately in Krishna consciousness, it's actually said, in answer to also your earlier question, that the people in Krishna consciousness are actually the biggest enjoyers, the biggest sense gratifiers, because we enjoy on a higher level. So actually, we all still need to enjoy, but we actually are experiencing joy from a different, experiencing what's known as the higher taste. So now I still before Krishna consciousness, I may have been going out partying and doing things like that, but now I still go out partying, but I do my partying in the temple with the devotees. Before Krishna consciousness, I may have been going out eating in restaurants, and now I still eat many nice foods, but I eat nice prasadam from the temple. So instead, I'm still enjoying, but I'm just doing it in a Krishna conscious way. So yeah, that's just a brief snippet of how long I've been in Krishna consciousness and why I decided to come.
Well, thank you. And do you still do your boxing or
I
practice?
do a little bit. I just a little bit of practice, but yeah, just to keep fit and things like that. But nothing too much, because I can see that it's very much in the mode of passion. So yeah, I try and just do it a little bit just to keep fit.
Fitness. Okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you for all your insights, and thank you for sharing your story. I'm sure it's very inspirational for all of us, and very grateful. Thank you for your time, Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I
What's
wish you
your
all
name?
the best. Sorry, my name is Divyesh.
Divyesh. Very nice to associate with Divyesh, and thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
I just wanted to mention something about, we are going to be, we are in this world, we are going to, we are suffering anyway. So why should we, one of the lectures I was listening to, they're saying, actually, if you think about a devotee and a non-devotee, devotee would think on a platform that I am a soul. I'm an eternal part of the Lord. So that bodily concepts will come out, because what is suffering is the material part of it. So the strength you gain from the just being a part and parcel of the Lord, that you are eternal. All the other dukhs, all the suffering, you will see even the suffering between a devotee and a non-devotee. Being in a hospital, you will see a non-devotee will be complaining constantly, but a devotee would be saying, this is Krishna's plan. I am eternal, so whatever Krishna wishes. So he won't be looking at the bodily concepts of life. So he'll be looking at the soul. So we are eternal soul, and we are part and parcel. And that is the knowledge which we get from the sadhu, shastra, and sangha. And that is the ultimate joy. That's what I wanted to contribute.
Thank you so much, Avinash Prabhu. What a wonderful point. And yes, Divyesh Prabhu even more wonderfully answered to your question, is that devotee undergoes miseries, but the difference is the devotee doesn't suffer, doesn't see it as suffering, doesn't undergo mental agitation. In fact, they're often at peace when they're, especially if we can really advance in our Krishna consciousness. And I saw this actually with a dear friend of mine, brahmachari by the name of Janikinath Prabhu, who left his body some time ago due to cancer. But throughout his 4 years of cancer, or 5 years even, while he was undergoing the disease, he would actually just share many, many realizations. And I will actually share, when I share the slides, I will actually share a talk of his he gave at a university, where he said that if I could give you all a gift where you would gain so much more empathy, you could gain a compassion for others, and so many realizations, would you accept it? And then he said that gift that he received was cancer, liver cancer. So amazing that a devotee actually sees his own pains and miseries as a gift that have brought him closer to Krishna. So yes, thank you so much, Avinash Prabhu, for that wonderful point, that as we cultivate this higher consciousness, we actually don't see our miseries as things of suffering. We actually see it as mercy of the Lord, because as a devotee advances, he doesn't see himself as this body. He sees himself as an internal part and part of the Lord.
Thank you. I think that both of you have really answered everything. Well, Avinash Prabhu, thank you. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Just thought whatever little I know, so I thought I better contribute a little bit. Hare Bol.
No, everything in Krishna consciousness is never little. Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you
Are
very
there
much,
any
Prabhuji.
Are there any more questions before we can end the session? If there are no more questions, then I believe we can end the session now. First, I would like to thank His Grace Kamal Panchal Prabhu for taking some time out and giving us this wonderful class on the Bhagavatam. And also the devotees assembled for making this a very discussive session with a few questions. So I would like to kindly request all the devotees assembled to kindly unmute yourselves and let us chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra once for the glorification of His Grace Kamal Panchal Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna,
Krishna, Krishna Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rupyascha kripa sindhubhyareva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Grace Kamal Panchal Prabhu
Ki
ki
Jai.
Jai.
God Pramanande.
Hari Bol.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. ISKCON Eldoret Ki. Jai.
Jai.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prahlad Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Yes,
And all
Hare
the
Krishna.
devotees. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
So I'll end the session now. Prahlad Prabhuji, Hare Krishna. Keshav?
Hare Krishna. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Prabhuji. I have to stop recording.